story begins with Mary, a very creative and restless girl who lived with her parents in a huge house on the outskirts. As she lived very far from the city, it was difficult for her to interact with other children, but she got tired of being alone, and her prodigious creativity gifted her an imaginary friend. She was only 6 years old when she created Jill, and she projected her as she would have liked her to be, a young, friendly, and cheerful woman. She wore a dazzling, colorful dress, and she was always ready to play with her. From that moment, Mary and Jill became inseparable. At first, her parents didn't give it more importance because they thought it was a simple childhood stage. But the years passed, and Mary was trapped in her imagination. She stayed motionless in her room, talking to Jill for hours. Her parents, totally desperate, decided to send her to a psychiatric facility. But Mary never stopped talking to Jill. During her days of confinement in the sanatorium, she was seeing how the bright colors of her friend faded, and her happy expression was transforming into a grimace of bitterness. As Mary didn't improve, the doctors decided to do a test to see if it was her imagination or if she really saw strange things. They led her into a cold room and tied her to a stretcher to keep it from moving, but when they introduced her inside the scanner, Mary began to shout out. She saw Jill at her side, writhing in pain, and she went completely mad. Even though she was bound, she struggled to free herself. Jill screamed and screamed in her ears. She was able to perceive her suffering, and Mary suffered at the same time with her. "Stop! Stop! I can't take it anymore!" she yelled. The lights in the room turned on, and one of the doctors came in with an angry expression. He pulled out Mary from the scanner and he yelled at her, "You were supposed to be still!" But the doctor suddenly paled. Beside Mary, he saw the figure of a young woman in a faded dress, and she was holding her hand. Her long hair, barely shiny, came down to her waist, and her nose ended in a strange peak. "Who are you, and what are you doing here?" asked the doctor, as Mary shifted on the gurney. The strange figure observed him after a half smile, but didn't answer his question. The doctor grabbed a pair of scissors, ready to confront her. He lunged at Jill and they began to struggle. When he managed to corner her, the doctor raised the pointed scissors, and he nailed them to Jill's body. But in the moment he was about to strike, she shoved him away, and the weapon went into Mary's skull, and the young woman stopped screaming. Blood began to gush out, dripping noisily onto the ground. Jill was dumbfounded at the heartbreaking scene. Her creator, her only friend, she had just died in front of her eyes. She noticed that the little color that was left in her body was fading, and madness took hold of her. Weak and dying, she fled the place. Within days, Mary's parents held a low-key funeral, which Jill saw from shades. She had become a total murderer. She felt hatred for everything they had done to the only person she had, but soon, her purge would begin. Later, when Mary's mother came home, she found a grotesque image. A huge pool of blood stained the living room floor, and when she looked up at the ceiling, she gasped. The body of the doctor who had tended to Mary hung from the lamp, completely torn to pieces. His eyes hung from the sockets, all his teeth were missing, and his body was completely leaky. Mary's mother turned pale. She turned to escape the horrendous scene, but when doing so, her eyes met Jill's paranoid face. With extraordinary force, the creature slammed her against the wall. She walked over to her, grabbed her by the neck, and lifted her up. She cornered her against the wall and said in a harsh voice, "You've taken my only friend from me. You will pay for it." Jill brought her face closer to that of her victim and very slowly pierced one of her eyes with her pointy nose. Mary's mother let out a heartrending cry as pain numbed her body. Jill smiled triumphantly, and then she pierced her other eye, leaving her half dead on the ground. A noise behind her startled her. It was Mary's father who had just entered the room. She turned and approached the man, who remained stuck to the wall, completely paralyzed. He didn't resist, so Jill, with a swift movement, pierced his stomach with her sharp nose, spilling his intestines on the floor. She gave a triumphant laugh that bounced around the house. Her revenge was finally complete, but before leaving the place, she crouched where the dying body of the father rested. She put his hands on his stomach, and with hot blood wrote on one of the walls, "Jill was here."
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it. And if you want to see more Draw My Life videos, subscribe to our channel. See you on the next episode.